Legal marijuana is not something just for the West Coast anymore. Cannabis reform is spreading like wildfire now. Through the election process last week, licensed adult use marijuana states expanded to include California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada, on top of the existing Washington, Colorado, Oregon, and Alaska. That makes 8 states. Additionally, Arkansas, Florida, Montana, and North Dakota joined the other 25 states where medical cannabis is now blessed and regulated and taxed. Arizona is the only state to have had a marijuana initiative on the ballot this year that failed to pass. Luckily, though, while Arizona adult use didn't pass, they have a pre-existing medical marijuana law to benefit Arizona patients. What this all means is that there's going to be a whole lot of cannabis-related rulemaking at the state level in the next year. As we have seen from other states already, though, that is likely going to be an exceptionally messy process. We learned from Dr. Dominic Corva on the show 2 weeks ago that even though cannabis policy transfer from other states that are already legal is becoming more common, many of the legislators and rulemakers at the state level have zero experience and knowledge of cannabis, and they very likely wish they didn't have to learn about cannabis at all. Every state has made cannabis legalization way more complex than it needs to be, both because they are unfamiliar with cannabis and rulemakers are still afraid of cannabis and think it means violent crime will increase when actually the opposite is true. So, what we are certainly going to see going forward is a patchwork of cannabis laws that are different from state to state. With this much rulemaking going on all at once, you can be assured that there will be some backdoor deal making between legislators, law enforcement, business people, and others who will seek to exert undue influence on how cannabis policy is formed. And I ask you, who will be watching these rulemakers to ensure that they follow appropriate laws concerning governance and rulemaking for a new law? No one. That's right. There is no one responsible to make sure that bureaucratic regulators are performing their role in a legal way. In fact, in Washington state, for example, the Liquor and Cannabis Board has already been found guilty of meeting secretly with law enforcement and others, but only after citizens caught them doing it. Today's show is about citizen oversight of cannabis law implementation. We are going to consider some of the ways that lobbyists can try to influence policy, how regulators have attempted to make rules in the shadows, and we will discuss some citizen oversight strategies that you can use to help your state regulators stay honest. My guest today is John Novak, founder of 420leaks.com. 420leaks.com is a citizen oversight organization that focuses on cannabis policy in Washington state. Their researchers obtain hard-to-find information through public records requests, as well as daily monitoring of state bills, rulemaking, local ordinances, and news that will have an effect on cannabis patients, providers, and enthusiasts. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thanks, Shango. It's good to be here. I'm very appreciative that you asked me to come on. Looking forward to it.
Well, I know we've been trying to put this together for a while. I'm glad we finally, got a chance to do it. So, John, a lot of people, they kind of like to have the idea that their state regulators and legislators are having their best interests at heart, and they like to just assume that their government officials are following the rules. But unfortunately, we know that is not always the case. So why don't we start by giving a little bit of a context of why 420 Leaks is necessary. From your extensive research, who are some of the other groups interested in influencing cannabis reform at the state level, and why are they trying to influence it?
That's a good question. There's, of course, we have, all the local activists who each have their own issues. A lot of it human rights based, like the home grows and sharing, descheduling, those kinds of things. And of course, we have the business interests who are, looking out for their bottom line and regulating the industry in, in proper ways and all that kind of stuff. And then we have other tiers of interested parties, and those are more the biggest ones I would say are the state the agency lobby firms and associations, like for instance the Association of Washington Cities and Counties. They all have their big lobby group. Then you have for instance, the Liquor Control Board, they have their own lobby group. Department of Health will have their own lobby group. And so those kinds of groups that's really what you see down there. And then you have kind of what I call the hidden persuaders, and they seem to be the ones that are more from Wall Street firms that are trying to come in and basically run the show. And we don't really see a whole lot of their faces. You see one or two, but for the most part, you don't even see them at all. They do a lot of their work behind the scenes. But the state agencies, those have been the hardest on this, and they seem to have the most impact as far as regulating, or I shouldn't say regulating, but for instance, like zoning stuff and all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest problems that we hear from those guys is that they are scared of federal law, they say, and implementing any of this stuff at the state level, they believe leaves them open to prosecution. So that's a lot of the big push that they have. And the other side of it too is they rely on federal funds, federal grants. Department of Health gets grants for different areas of healthcare. Liquor Control Board, I'm not sure if they have a federal grant program in place yet. I've been trying to figure that out. But that, and the cities and the counties especially, are really tied into that. They receive a lot of federal money. So the question that I'm trying to find out is the tax money from 502 enough to offset that? I'm not quite sure yet. So but those are the biggest groups that have been down there.
So what I'm gathering here from your answer is that every state is going to have lots of players that are trying to influence policy, and some that you're expecting, but then there's a lot of extra folks with priorities that are kind of in the shadows. And, I guess
substance abuse is another group that you see a lot of down there.
Yeah. And I guess, and probably law enforcement too.
Yeah.
So putting myself in the seat of the regulator or the legislator who is, the target of the influence and also the target of your research to help keep them honest, I guess it isn't necessarily that they are trying to be bad actors themselves. It's just the fact that they're being influenced from all these different directions. And, we need watchdogs in each state who are making sure that folks are not bending or breaking the rules in their influence. Is that a pretty fair way to look at it? Is that, the watchdog is just looking to make sure that people are playing by the rules?
Well, very much so. In our state, though, keeping an eye on the legislators is a little bit harder because they have exempted themselves from most of the public records. So about the only way that I can get public records on them is if they were to make a public statement about a document that they used in order to come up with a policy, something along those lines. And then I could ask them, hey, well, I want to see that document. But other than that, the legislators are pretty much off the boards, and you can ask, but they're not under any kind of requirement to turn over any records. So kind of one of the ways that I get around that, though, is I'll go to the agency side and say, I want to see your communications with specific legislators. And sometimes I can get it, sometimes I don't. It's just a matter of, how much information that they were actually willing to put down on paper and send back and forth between each other. But as far as keeping tabs on the legislators, one of the better ways is going to the Public Disclosure Commission website and following where all the campaign contributions are going. That's a very big part of this as well. Go ahead.
So the work that you do is obviously very arcane. Not a lot of people know how to request these documents that you uncover that can show the corruption or the bending of the rules or whatever you're looking for. And so, let's go step by step, to a certain degree on how you decide what records you want, because, you're talking about getting these records, but honestly, to a novice like me, I don't even know how you do that. I mean, all I'm thinking about is that Freedom of Information Act, and I don't even know if that's the appropriate, rule in this case. For folks who are seeking to emulate you down the line, kind of just give us a blueprint of how you get these documents at a state level.
Well, let's start with just 502 in general. When it passed, the state, the liquor, now it's called the Liquor and Cannabis Board, but then it was called the Liquor Control Board. And each agency, when the legislature passes a bill and puts rulemaking power into the hands of the state agencies, like was done with 502, then the Liquor Control Board goes through a process of gathering as much information from various sources, including the public normally, and then they will put together a package and then implement the rule. And in our state, we have an actual RCW that defines how that information has to be maintained by the agency, and it's called the rulemaking file. So you can request that full file, and then they're supposed to give you everything that they have on hand that led them to the decision making on that specific rule. Like, for instance, the 1,000-foot rule for how close cannabis businesses could be to a school or a park or something like that. Well, there was an actual rule-making process where they had to take input and all that kind of stuff and document it and keep it on file. So you can ask for that. And that's a simple step to take with the agencies. It's just asking for their rule-making file. Now, in the case of the 502 rulemaking file, we got a lot of information from it originally, but we started seeing that there was a lot of information that was being left out, specific meetings with law enforcement, that kind of stuff. So we kept digging further and asking further, and finally we started getting some of that information. So it's you have to you don't always know what you're going to get, of course, when you ask for it, but you have to kind of get a general idea of what you're looking for, at least to give a general idea. So
when you say ask for, what does that actually mean? I mean, is that as simple as sending an email to somebody and asking for it? I'm assuming that there's some application you have to fill out or something, isn't there?
Well, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do it with a handwritten letter and ask for specific documents. And since we're talking about the Liquor and Cannabis Board, each agency has their own public records division. And they have their own rules set around it. And there's, like a small fee if they have to scan over like hard copy documents into electronic version. There might be a charge there, or printing and scanning. So minimum type of charges. But basically what it is, you go to the Liquor Control Board, and on their page you look for public records. On the side panel, and you go there, and then they actually give you an email address. I believe it's publicrecords@lcb.wa.gov, and you just basically ask for what you want. The way I do it is I start off, and I just say public records request in the subject line of the email, and then I'll say in the main body of the message, like, this is a public records request for the 1,000-foot rulemaking file. I would like these in electronic format if possible. And basically I sign my name, give them my phone number, and send it off. So it can be as simple as that, or it can be as more complicated if you're looking, say, for specific tax disbursements to specific agencies. So you can go general, you can go very specific. It just all really depends on what you're looking for.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm actually surprised at how easy it actually sounds like it is. I mean, that's a request that sounds like just how anybody could do it. And,
yes.
and also it sounds like there's a certain amount of discretion on the receiver of the email too, because you're asking for whatever you're asking for, and that can be, redefined by the person on the receiving side about, how much scope of work they're going to do to answer your request. So
usually they will. So for instance, let's say I hit the send button, I sent that request in, then the agency has 5 business days from there to respond back to me to let me know, okay, we got it. If they are not completely sure of what you're asking, they may ask you to clarify it. They might restate it in a way they think that you're asking. So then you have to follow up and make sure, yeah, that sounds good. Or if it is what you asked for and you feel that they have it right in their head what you want, then you just let them go. But one of the things that you got to keep on top of, at least respond back and make sure that you're actually getting, or they're telling you is what you want. And then they have to give you a specific time period on approximately how long they believe it'll take for them to do it. So it's a little bit of work, but in the long run, for each individual one, it really doesn't take a whole lot of time. But it's, again, keeping tabs on their responses and making sure you respond back the right way.
Right on. Cool. We're going to take our first short break and be right back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. As a business owner, you are incredibly busy. In reality, you are responsible for everything your company does. You have so many responsibilities every single day that often you just don't have the time to really dig into something as deeply as you'd like. You know there is more that you could do to reach out to new customers and to encourage loyalty in the customers you already have, but you certainly don't have the time, and you're not ready to hire someone full-time for that role either. For you, I recommend Blunt Branding. Blunt Branding principals Kirsten Nelson and Anthony Garcia are focused on improving your bottom line. Most marketing firms are excited to make your logo, packaging, and website very pretty, but they leave responsibility for improving your bottom line up to you. They don't want that kind of responsibility. But that is pretty much the most important part of marketing, right? Kirsten and Anthony will help you engage new customers, funnel them to your point of sale, and keep them coming back to you and telling their friends. No doubt, this is a paid commercial spot, but that does not mean they bought my opinion. I've worked with Blunt Branding on 3 projects now for various clients, and every single time they have done more than they have promised and over-delivered on results. I love how they generate new revenue and focus on that as the goal instead of just making me a pretty logo. Similarly, every friend I've referred them to has come back to thank me, and that just does not happen every day. So grab a pen and paper because the website address is coming. If you want someone to implement marketing programs that feed your bottom line, give Blunt Branding a call. They will share proven techniques to increase your audience and generate sales while using cutting-edge technology in the background that make all of this easy, automatic, and trackable. Go to shapingfire.com/Blunt Branding to find out more. You can also click the link in our weekly newsletter. Blunt Branding, marketing that makes you money. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and our guest this week is John Novak of 420leaks.com. So, John, before the break, we were talking about, how to get the files targeted to know what you're looking for, and then how to go ahead and put in a request for them. And, it actually was surprisingly easy compared to what I thought it was going to look like. And, I know that one of the things that you have found is very often you will be asked asking for particular documents. And they should exist because, most states have some version of the Open Meetings Act where when they meet to talk about future regulations and laws, that they have to document that. But you found that, at least in Washington, this wasn't happening. And this is something that people should be looking for to potentially happen at every state. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that so people know what to look for?
Sure. One of the things that we found early on was that the Liquor and Cannabis Board were having secret meetings with law enforcement. And they began publishing their calendar of events, and we were seeing that they were having these public meetings in the big cities like Spokane, Seattle, and Yakima. But then they were also listing that they were having meetings with these different groups during the day. And according to our state law, if two or more of the board members meet together, it becomes an actual official meeting. The public needs to be notified, and their input needs to be considered. And they were not doing that. So going through the rulemaking file again, seeing they're asking for their calendar of events, and then you can kind of get an idea, okay, well, what's being publicized openly and what's not. And so that's kind of how we started catching them on that.
So to say they're having secret meetings, I want to drill down on that a little bit because that could be hyperbole. Secret seems to suggest some kind of ill will. Do you think that these were intentionally being hidden, or did they just not make no one put it in the file? Does it seem like an accidental oversight, or does it feel like they were intentionally trying to keep this out of the file?
Well, that's another great part of one of the things you can ask for is the communications between people. And so we asked for all communications as well on this specific thing. And we started seeing that the meetings were being set up by the Liquor Control Board staff at the request of law enforcement. And a lot of the concern was the law enforcement wanted to have the full attention of the Liquor Control Board without having to talk around the general public. They just wanted their group, their message. And that's all well and good if you're having a meeting with an individual board member, but when you put the board together, then you're getting into a whole different level of public integrity there. And so we could see in the communications that's what they were trying to do. They did not want the public to be participating to counter any message that they were trying to get across.
It must be really odd to read those emails because when you write an email, you're talking to another person personally, and so you're speaking to them in like regular language, but they are going into a bureaucratic file of documentation. You probably see some things in those emails which are both odd but also kind of telling. Like you can start to pull out people's intent if you're reading them in there. If you read all the messages.
Right. Yeah, you very much can. And for whatever reason, they continue to write their emails back and forth. And some of the things that we've caught some of them saying basically just, they don't, for the most part, these agencies don't have a lot of good things to say about the cannabis community. I'll put it that way.
So how about like phone calls? Like does everything happen via email so that there's an official paper trail, or how would they document phone calls that would take place like between a lobbyist and a regulator?
Lobbyist and that's a whole different side of public records because they go under the Public Disclosure Commission. And I spent about 2 years studying up on politics and money and all that kind of stuff before we got involved with actual political action committee stuff, because I wanted to make sure that we followed the rules and all that kind of stuff. So I don't really have complete answers for you on lobby requirements and bills yet, but one of the things that I was somewhat disappointed in finding out was that when lobbyists write or present bills, there really is no requirement that that be disclosed to anyone. The only thing that must be disclosed on the lobby side is if money is being spent one way or the other. For instance, if the lobbyist were to go and take them out to dinner, or give them some kind of gift or something along those lines, those kinds of things have to be reported. Travel expenses and all that kind of stuff. So, but that was really the only way that I found that you can see what lobbyists are behind what bills is, one, go down to the public hearings and see who's coming on board with them, or two, look and see what lobby firms are contributing to what candidates, and to which the other side of lobbying too, it's not just candidates that they give these contributions to. They also go to committee caucuses, party committees, and those groups. There's no limit on what you can give to those. There's a limit on what you can give to a candidate. But so, for instance, a business lobby firm had about $50,000, and I'd say probably like 20,000 of it may have gone out to about 20 different candidates at about $1,000 each, and then you'll see big chunks of money being pushed to these caucus or party committees, where then the parties then distribute it from there. But the caucus committees are more issue driven, apparently, and so there's a lot of wheels that need to be greased by lobby money in order to get bills passed. And that has been both a very eye-opening and very revealing part of this whole study.
John,
but it's the biggest part. It's the biggest puzzle, though, because there's a lot more pieces that you got to put together.
Joe, I think a puzzle is actually a really good example, because as I sit here and listen to you, when you were telling me about the master file that's kept about the deliberations before, a regulation is made, I was thinking to myself, wow, it's great that they keep all that stuff at one place. It's very transparent. Yeah, we need to watchdog them to make sure that everything goes in the file, but that's really great. We can watch how our regulations are made. Well, then your next set of information was all like, oh yeah, we can't track this, we can't track that. There's a lot of money. To find out who the lobbyists are working on something, you need to go and see who's in the room. And then it's suddenly that like just this tore up my conception that that this was transparent. Now it suddenly feels very not transparent. And I can imagine you having to read all of this. I would think that most of it is pretty mundane, emails and communications. And then all of a sudden you find, somebody saying something that refers to something that you haven't seen anywhere. And then things start to unravel, but you have to like dig forever just to find that. This doesn't sound very transparent anymore.
No. Well, yes and no. Like the biggest details, of course, is finding, which lobbyist wrote this bill, which went to this senator, to this committee. So that's the legwork that takes a lot more than just sending public requests back and forth. It does take a lot of work, and it can be very time consuming, and it's like a whole other wing of activism that really needs its own staff. And then you have, again, back to the agency public records, that's almost, again, its own staff. So It's a lot of work, but and in any given year or two, we also have these state agencies will go crying to the legislators saying that, this is costing us way too much, way too many man hours to find all these records, and so it's a constant tug of war.
Yeah, sounds like it's the price of a democracy, though. When you're doing this research, you just must be elated when you find a thread to pull on, though. If you're gonna spend a couple days trolling, or not troll, I don't think that's the right word, but anyway, digging through a big pile of documents, and then you find one thing, you're like, oh, here's something that could give me cause to make a new records request, because now you can get more specific, or somebody referring to an idea or a meeting that is not in the rest of the file. That must be very gratifying at that point, because you're like, oh, here's something to work with.
Well, yeah, it takes a little bit of training in your mind to listen a little harder for keywords. Well, here's an example. There was a study released by Department of Health, and I think in collaboration with a couple of other agencies, Liquor Control Board and stuff, and they wanted to look at how 502 and all of this was impacting our youth. So they came up with a study that they went out to different high schools to see, where how it was affecting the kids. And some of the conclusions they came up with were left me scratching my head. So, but just by the sheer fact that they did a study and sent people out makes you realize, there's a document there. There's a list of questions somewhere that they were asking people. So when I saw the file of, it was basically what the information that I saw that led me to this was a PowerPoint presentation put on by the Department of Health that they were presenting to legislators. So I was reading down through all the slides, and I kept coming across these, different study points, and a couple of them really had me scratching my head. So I was like, okay, I need to see the study and where all this information was coming from, because one of the things they were claiming was that the minorities were having a harder problem with it in the schools than the white folks. And I'm like, this is sounding a little, I don't want to say racist, but, all the research that I've seen in the past showed that blacks and whites use cannabis at a pretty even rate. So why they were saying that this black kids in school are having a harder time with it, and I want to know more. So I asked for the actual study, and that I just got that a couple days ago. I haven't had a chance to go through and look at it, but just by seeing on there they had done a study, that I knew then, okay, I can ask for that study.
Yeah, right on. I follow that. And it makes for some pretty detailed reading, I'm sure. So hey, we're going to take it's a good way to put yourself to sleep at night. Right on. Hey, it's time to take our second break. So we will be right back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. Look inside this crystal ball with me for a moment. I'm looking just a couple months into the future. I'm seeing the future of the Shaping Fire podcast. The show sure has grown. I've continued to interview fascinating cannabis industry luminaries, and our audience has gotten huge. It has doubled and redoubled and doubled again. There are high fives all around the Shaping Fire World headquarters. New listeners are subscribing every day and begin to listen to the back catalog of all the great interviews there. And that is where the Shaping Fire audience learns about your company. You were incredibly smart today to become an early adopter and place a commercial in Shaping Fire's early episodes. If you become an advertiser on the Shaping Fire podcast now, today, you are going to pay a fraction of the cost we'll be asking in just 2 months. And yet, All the audience that listens to our back catalog of interviews will hear about your company again and again. It's a great deal for you. Pay a small amount now because the show is so new, but take advantage of the huge listening audience we will have forever. This crystal ball is not a smoke dream. Do yourself a solid and contact us today for rates on podcast and newsletter advertising. Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out more. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and our guest this week is John Novak of 420leaks.com. So, John, during the show today, you have described, a lot of detail-oriented work, a lot of, kind of pushing against the bureaucracy, but, also with important wins of being able to keep regulators honest and essentially, defending the citizenry of the state. And the goal, of course, of the show is to inspire people in other states that are, just coming online with cannabis and starting to normalize and moving towards some kind of legalization to inspire folks to watch their own state regulators. So, I got to ask you, what are some of the challenges personally to doing this kind of work?
The personal challenges, the hardest one is just keeping yourself motivated to go through all this boring stuff. And that, especially when you get in, gigabyte after gigabyte of information, and that's one of the hardest things to do. Trying to get other people to help out, that's been a struggle, because it's not the funnest work to do, and the rewards, you may have to go weeks, if not months, before you see any kind of results. So that's it's a good question.
Yeah. But, obviously you're doing it and you're passionate about it. And so, you've got to know that it's important. I mean, somebody's got to watch the government. Well, why for you do you feel that it's important that people like you stand up and watch the government to make sure that they are doing things by rule of law?
Well, I actually started doing I would say my skills on this came actually from doing a due diligence on stocks, for the stock market. And it takes a lot of, going through and reading all the company documents and figuring out, where money's coming in, where it's going out, if they actually have a product and all that kind of stuff. So it just takes a lot of going through a lot of boring information, but it is super important to do if you take investing seriously. So that was kind of the training that I had going into this. So, and it really kind of started out for me. Of course, I wanted to see where all the laws were going, since I am a patient myself. But I also wanted to see how, what kind of environment I would be getting myself into if I decided to enter into the industry. And that was really the biggest push for me, of why I wanted to do all this. Because if I, first off, we got, let's be honest here, this is still against federal law. So that's in and of itself means you got so many different areas of law that you got to make sure your butt's covered on. You got to follow not only state law, you got to follow what the feds are doing, kind of get an idea of what other states are doing. So that attention to detail and due diligence is really what gave me my push to do it. The benefits of doing it, though, are absolutely wonderful, because instead of relying on, let's say, what the press is telling you what's going on, or what any individual legislator or even any individual activist might be telling you what's going on, when you have the actual documents in front of you, you see what's being said, you see what's going on, you have a much better understanding of the entire situation, because you're taking it from the horse's mouth instead of, different spins on it. And that, I think, is one of the most valuable parts. And of course, to a certain degree, I wish it was more, keeping politicians and these state agencies honest. And the biggest threat that if we don't do this is that they'll just think that nobody's watching and they can get away with whatever they want. They don't. Then they'll take. They won't take the full steps to completely document what they're doing, and to the worst extremes of corruption that you hear about in the news. And unfortunately, when I talk to other activists and even some legislators and people in this, they say, as a whole, our country is and local government is becoming more corrupt than more honest these days. So that is, in a lot of ways, I think that this activism really has more to do with about open government than it does about cannabis.
This might be kind of a bittersweet question, but, I know you've dedicated, well, at least your life right now to this because this is your main thing. But, how do you know when you're succeeding? Because this seems like you are, you're working on this ocean trove of information. How do you know when you're winning?
Well, the easiest way to know that when you're winning is, of course, you get attention from the press or legislators, and they'll come up and say, "Hey, we want to change. What you're seeing there. We want to change." That's an immediate type of win, and that can be very gratifying. Unfortunately, though, most of the wins come in ways that you can kind of see your information is influencing the public debate, even though your name is not specifically mentioned. And I see that a lot in the, I won't bring up any big names, but some of the bigger newspapers in the area absolutely refuse to publish my name, 420 Leaks, or anything to do with it, because they are interested in a multi-billion-dollar industry continuing, which I'm all for too. But let's do it honestly here, guys. But so I do. You see a lot of that though when a bigger story will come out, and then you'll kind of start hearing about the debate. Let's say, for instance, there was a massive leak where the Liquor Control Board accidentally turned over private information on applicants. Well, some of the cannabis reporters jumped on that immediately, but then at the higher level of let's say like through Seattle Times, the Spokane Chronicle or whatever, the bigger newspapers, they didn't cover that until the Liquor Control Board actually started sending out letters to people. Then the big news got in, but still, for the most part, we didn't get a lot of credit for that leak. But then we started seeing a bigger issue being talked about patient privacy, and so sometimes you don't get the credit, but you can see that your point was made, and the debate is beginning. And then so you have to kind of. A lot of it is you don't get a lot of credit for some of this stuff, but the debate moves forward, and that's really the end goal. That should be the bottom line. If the debate is moving forward, you're winning.
Right on. That makes a lot of sense. So let's finish up with this last question, John. So if my goal with this show is that I wanted to be able to reach out to our listeners across the country and maybe have them hear your story about what you're doing in Washington and inspire them to do that in their own state. Because, if it takes your full time to do Washington, we need at least 49 other people across the country to be doing this so that each state can be covered. So somebody out there is listening, and they're listening to the work that you're doing, and it sounds interesting and engaging to them, and they're thinking about doing this in their own state. What would you say to them to help inspire them to move forward?
You're going to find this is both the hardest and but at the same time most rewarding thing that you'll do. you're going to find a lot of garbage in there that just has no real no meaning to exactly what it is you're looking for, but you have to keep going. One of the things that drives me is the human rights angle, that every person out there should have the right to plant a seed and take care of themselves. So when you have a focus like that, it kind of narrows down to a degree what specifically you're going for. So, and it helps. So, and the other thing it does is it when you're sending out those requests, it puts those agencies on notice that you're watching them. And for the sometimes, they're so big, they have so much money and influence, they don't really care. But when you take that information and then make it public, and then suddenly they take it a little more seriously, and that's what I begin to find, that you get not only do you get the information that you're looking for in a more complete picture, but you also begin to develop a reputation, especially with legislators, that while they may not like what you're doing, they know why you're doing it. And for the most part, they really don't have much to say to the negative side on that. And being able to inform your fellow activists of exactly what's going on with these laws. And so it helps your group to really define where the issues you need to focus are. A lot of us get caught up in a lot of the extraneous stuff, and the red hats versus the blue hats, or should we have like 6 plants versus 8 plants or 4? And a lot of times you'll get groups that kind of split apart and get trapped into a lot of that stuff. Whereas if you focus on specific issues and you can see where the enemy or the obstacle is, it becomes easier when you go in with a handful of documents, especially when they're in their own words, and you can say, this is why it needs to be fixed. And here, and actually that's another point of the thing is you can find a lot of stuff that's wrong, and they do want to hear some of that, but really what they're looking for is, okay, how do we make it right? But you cannot get to that step of how do I make it right until you have all the information in front of you. And that's the biggest part of why I think this is most important.
John, thank you for all your hard work, and thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
John Novak is founder of 420 Leaks. You can find out more info at 420leaks.com. You can email John directly at 420leaks@gmail.com. And you can also call the Activist Leak line at 206-915-3450. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and on Apple iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news and product reviews. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. For information on me and where I will be speaking, you can check out ShangoLos.com. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.